Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a beer from Copper Kettle Brewing Company, and this is a pumpkin seasonal beer that came out. This one is called Spooky Hollow, and it is an Imperial pumpkin porter. 9.2% ABV on this one, and it has been rum barrel aged. Copper Kettle is based in Denver, Colorado. Now, Copper Kettle, I typically get their very tall cans on their beers, which is always awesome. This one's Spooky Hollow. It's kind of got some themed art on there. Get you in the mood for the season. Pumpkin beers I like to get them when they come out. This, obviously, I've had set away for a little while. Easy to age. It's over 9% ABV. It's got that rum barrel aging. I'm kind of expecting this is going to really work well. Just the subtleties of the rum, what it brings to the table in a nice Imperial Porter format. That's also a pumpkin beer. So let's get this cracked. We are using our nice porter glass today, of course. And we will get this poured right in. Pretty good start to a pour. All right. Little agitation. Let it form a head. Back it off. All right. Oh yeah, that poured beautifully. So this is very, very dark. It is a porter, of course. It is not pitch black. If you weren't holding it up to a super bright LED on a set, maybe you wouldn't be able to see any light getting through at all, but at the very bottom of the glass, I can see. So it's not true pitch black, but it's very, very dark indeed. It is pretty hard to see any carbonation at all, but I do see a little bit of cling on the side, and it's super tiny, fine champagne-like, which this did form quite a nice, thick, rich, creamy head here. So yeah, porters do tend to be very active in terms of carbonation, but when the carbonation is nice and tight like that, you typically get a head instead of a quickly collapsed head, which is very common on a porter. So let's get right up over this for a sniff. Oh wow, yeah. That smells absolutely incredible. It's very, very pungent. The pumpkin jumps right at you, as does the rum barrel. Now, the underlying malt bill for the porter, I'm really not detecting anything on there. I'm not picking up any roasty notes, any other subtleties from the malt bill, just due to the overall pungency of that rum barrel and the pumpkin additives. But I can tell you, it smells absolutely fantastic. So it's gonna probably make a mess of my beard, but we're gonna jump right in. Oh yeah. Oh, that's really, really nice. So before we even get into the flavor profile, let's talk weight and texture. This is a 9.2% ABV beer. It is an Imperial Porter, and it has real weight to it. I would say this is kind of on the cusp between medium heavy and heavy. It's maybe not quite as heavy as I'd expect in this ABV range, but it's very, very close. In terms of texture, this is one that you can feel a decent bit of resistance, but kind of like the body, it's not quite as thick feeling on the palate when you agitate as I expected. But it is very, very silky, very, very creamy. It feels quite lush on the palate. In terms of flavor profile, as soon as you swallow, the first thing you get is a very noticeable pumpkin flavor. And they didn't specify spice additives on the can, but it does taste like it's got some typical, maybe some nutmeg, some cinnamon underlying. It does taste like that. So it's not just pumpkin by itself in a porter. At least that's how my palate perceives it. Now, in terms of the rum barrel, it's got some elements that it's throwing in here, notably some sugar caramelizations, which is quite common. But it's actually not quite as intense as you would expect. And indeed, there's not really a sense or flavor of booziness at all. You get kind of the subtle added elements in the flavor profile that it brings to the table, but it's not really the driving force. And for me, I actually really like that, because with barrel aging, you can sometimes drown out the beer. This at its heart is an Imperial Porter that they did pumpkin style. So the pumpkin comes through clearly, which brings me to my final thing in the flavor profile to report is, yes, this is got a very dominant porter malt bill. It's very, very roasty. It's almost emanating some nutty and chocolate-like undertones. And porters are one of those beer styles, for my money, it's kind of hit or miss what you get. This is a really good one. I'm not getting any funky flavors, any off flavors, no kind of raisiny qualities, which are relatively common in porters. It's a tough beer style to get exactly right, but I'm pleased to report that Copper Kettle did absolutely get this right. And from what I got on first sip, they really nailed the balance on this as well. So I'm going to jump back in. We'll get sip number 2, see if I missed anything, then we'll talk about this finish. But on first sip, really, really nice beer. Take 2. Pumpkin first, and it does taste of pumpkin spices. Start to get a little bit of that rum barrel quality. It's really caramelized sugars. On second sip, it's intensified a little bit. There's a little bit of a spirit, but again, it's not dominating the flavor profile at all. Then within about the 3-second mark is when the underlying roasty malt bill really starts to open up. And then it's really dominant, equal parts of the malt bill and the pumpkin and whatever potential spice additives they have in here. But it's really, really nice. Balance for my money is spot on. I like that I get the barrel and the subtleties that it brings to the table without it drowning out that underlying malt bill or the pumpkin additives. I think for my money, this is exactly how I would want a beer like this balanced, and I think they got it exactly right. In terms of the finish, this is a big, full, wet, round finish all the way to the end, and it is longer than average, but maybe not as long as you would expect for a rum barrel-aged Imperial Porter. Really what's driving it out on this is that lingering pumpkin and pumpkin spice and a little bit of that underlying roastiness from the malt bill. That's what's driving it out. So it's above average, but it's not quite as long as you would perhaps expect. But in general, I think this is a very, very well done pumpkin beer. I have yet to see one in an Imperial Porter format. I'm really glad I got my hands on this. This is very, very good. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now we're going to get this beer ranked. This was Copper Kettle Brewing Company's Spooky Hollow. It's an Imperial Pumpkin Porter, clocking in at 9.2% ABV. This one was rum barrel aged. Copper Kettle is based in Denver, Colorado. So, starting with the aroma on this beer was absolutely fantastic. You could really smell the barrel in tandem with the pumpkin side. Now, on the aroma, the underlying malt bill wasn't quite as pronounced, but this being pumpkin, it's a very pungent aroma. I rather did expect that, but what came out of the glass and the overall pungency was absolutely fantastic. The aroma does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste, I absolutely think they nailed this one. Rum barrel aging was a really good choice. I think that it paired very well with the pumpkin and certainly in this Imperial Porter base. It was absolutely fantastic. So while you couldn't really detect the underlying roastiness of the malt bill in the aroma, in the flavor profile, it was absolutely present. It was very intense, very roasty, had a lot of chocolatey undertones to it as well. And it was a really well done porter. I say this often, porter is one of those beer styles that is kind of hard to nail. And there's often these kind of funky and off flavors. This was not like that at all. I think they absolutely nailed it, and the combination and the ratio of what they did with it was spot on. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body was certainly above average, but it wasn't quite as weighty as I expected for a 9.2% Imperial Porter. Gets a 7 out of 10 here. For the mouthfeel had a good bit of resistance. This one was indeed very silky, but I, again, kind of like with the body, I expected it to have a bit more resistance than it did. This one, also a little deviation from your normal porter. You'll really feel that intensity of carbonation on the palate. This wasn't that way. It was just nice and silky, just wasn't quite as thick and resistant. But above average again, the mouthfeel gets a 7 out of 10. For the finish on this was definitely above average, but considering the absolute intensity and pungency of the flavors, in particular the barrel and the added pumpkin, I did expect that the finish would linger around a little longer than it did. Again, this is above average, but not quite as long as I expected. Finish gets a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did absolutely beautifully. Formed a nice, thick, creamy head, stuck around the whole time. Head and retention gets a 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this was nearly pitch black. If you don't hold it up in front of an LED, it probably would look pitch black. Absolutely beautiful. The appearance gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this, I talked about this on the flavor profile. I think they nailed it. A really good quality rum barrel left in for the right amount of time, the right amount of pumpkin added, so everything in this beer had its own voice and played its part. The underlying base malt bill and structure of the porter itself and the pumpkin and the rum barrel, they all worked in unison. Balance gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible subjectively, I really enjoyed this one. I think they nailed it, 10 out of 10. Finally, this is an example of the style. So this beer lost a few points in a few categories, but it's one of these that was just so well crafted, so well done, and particularly if I consider the balance, they weren't really categories that make that big of an impact on what this beer and its example of a style is about. Body, mouthfeel, finish. It is what it is. It didn't quite meet my expectations for the ABV range, but I can't knock any points. This was a beautiful example of an Imperial flavored porter. I did give it full points, 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Copper Kettle Brewing Company's Spooky Hollow to a 91 out of 100. Well above average. If you're a big fan of pumpkin beers and you're able to get your hands on this, I don't know if this is one they release annually or not. I got this in 2021, but absolutely worth your time. And in Imperial Porter format, I thought that they just knocked it out of the park. Everything about this beer was spot on. They clearly had super fine control over exactly what they wanted out of this, and it showed. This was a truly delicious beer. I would recommend this to anybody. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.